Hey, my years in the Army. This one's a little bit longer. After graduating from high school, finally, I decided to enlist in the Army, primarily to avoid the draft. We were in the Vietnam War at this time, and my draft number came up quite low, meaning that there was a good chance I would be drafted. When drafted into the Army, you primarily are assigned to the infantry. I wanted to choose an MOS, military occupational specialty, that would teach me a skill. Being told in high school that I wasn't college material, I annoy others, LOL. I still remember the day that I took the bus from the Farmers Co-op to Induction Center in Butte, Montana. Mom took me to the bus station to say goodbye to me. It still breaks my heart, remember seeing her tears and how sad she was, wishing that I was not going into the military, and how I just wanted to get on the bus and be off. To this day, I still believe that there was a piece of my brain missing back then. The arriving enlistees, including me, stayed in a hotel across from the induction center that night. I was a bit apprehensive, wondering if I had made the right decision. It was a difficult time in my life, and it seemed that I really had no option. I remember thinking that I had to move forward in some way in my life, and staying in mission and working on the plywood mill north of Ronan just didn't seem like the right solution. The mill was paying $4.25 an hour, which was good back then in 1971. Some guys in my graduating class thought that getting on at the Plum Creek plywood mill, buying a trailer house, and marrying your high school love was heaven. I remember three things specifically about the next day's experience: being asked what religion I was, my full body x-ray, and being sworn in to defend my country under all conditions, including giving my own life. I sat next to a military person that was typing out the specifics about me in preparation to issuing me my dog tags, as they were called back then. I remember him telling me, yeah, after you're shot, they stick these between your teeth before they put you in your army coffin and ship you back home. It was his "I'm in the army and tough" humor. Your dog tags has your name, social security number, your blood type for obvious reasons, and your religion. See the picture of my dog tags. Oh, here they are on the next page. When he came to the last question, what is your religion? I hesitated. I had not been active in church for about 3 years, since I was 16. Growing up in St. Ignatius as a Mormon was at times difficult. There was a lot of labeling and strong prejudice against Mormon kids. I remember even the teachers in school seemed overly aware of the Mormon myths. When I hesitated, he stopped and just stared at me, waiting for my answer. I remember thinking that I don't care if I get harassed by some drill sergeant. I can't deny my beliefs, even if I don't go to church. I knew it was true. So said Mormon. He looked at me and then at something on his desk and said, "That is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, right?" I replied, yes. I thought a lot about things after that, knowing that I might be assigned to Vietnam. I will mention one other thing at this point in my writings. Even though my 10 years of not being active in the church, I always prayed, always. I've known Heavenly Father and His Son, Jesus Christ, for a long time, ever since my father knelt down beside me in my upstairs bedroom of the old stucco home and taught me how to talk to Heavenly Father and who He really is. The second thing I remember well and often joked about it to others is my full body x-ray. After the x-ray was completed, I went back into the dark room where there were all these x-ray images of my body attached to a large frame for viewing. There was this huge, I thought so at the time, African-American sergeant standing by them. He looked at me and said, "Come here, I want to ask you a question." I walked up to one of the images he was standing by, which was my head. He pointed to the x-ray and asked rather dramatically, "Boy, what happened to you here?" As he pointed to all the dots in my skull, I smiled and said, "Well, I got shot with a shotgun." He looked at me, then back to the screen, shaking his head, and said, "My, you are lucky to be standing here." He asked me something to the effect of, "Do these pieces in your skull ever bother you?" To which I said no. I remember it as if it was yesterday, and still smile remembering the look on his face. The last vivid memory of that day was being sworn in. These are the words of the commitment to your country, which you were asked to repeat with your arm to the square. I blank do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me, according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God. I remember that that it was an emotional experience that left me realizing how patriotic I really was. My father was in World War II on a PT boat in the Pacific Islands when there was heavy fighting with Japan. He was very patriotic and really loved his country. I always wanted to listen when he talked about the war. It fascinated me. To this day, am very proud of the fact that I served my country and was willing to go anywhere assigned. I had 8 weeks of what they called basic training in Fort Ord, California, from the airport in San Francisco. We were bused to base, which was just outside of Monterey. We were first taken into an orientation room and asked to discard all guns and knives into a 50-gallon open drum container on our way in. I was shocked at the number of guns and knives that were dropped into the barrel. It was nearly midnight by the time we went through orientation and were issued our clothing and some basic essentials, and then taken to our barracks. The barracks were long, 2-story buildings for our company of newly arrived recruits. We were in these old wooden barracks for the first 2 weeks until we had been fully indoctrinated into military life, and then moved into some much nicer buildings where we were 4 to a room with single beds and lockers, as opposed to a wooden footlocker. At that time, we were also allowed to begin to take liberty and go off base on some weekends. I remember the first night in the wooden barracks, as they were called. I had to use the bathroom really bad. I climbed out of my bed and walked downstairs to the latrine. I couldn't believe what I saw. 12 toilets in a row with about 18 inches of air between them, period. I had to go number 2, and there was already 2 or 3 guys sitting there doing number 2. Nope, not me. I went back upstairs and held it until I was sure nobody was down there, then quietly went back down. For me, that was the worst thing going so far. I awoke the next morning early to someone screaming at the bottom of the stairs, "Drill sergeant," to all of us that we had to be dressed in uniform, beds made, and down to formation in 10 minutes and counting. I rushed as fast as I could to be one of the last 3 coming down the stairs. But was one of the last 3 coming down the stairs. When he saw us running down the stairs, he began counting from 10 down to 1. When he got to 5, he quickly finished 4, 3, 2, 1 to ensure we would not make it. He walked up to me and began screaming that I was never to be late again. "Do you understand?" About 3 inches from my face. I screamed back, "Yes, sir." He then told me to crawl under the building, which had an open 2-foot clearing under the entire building, and to find a cigarette butt and bring it out, which I did while feeling really awkward and foolish. We then had the other 2 that he made late conduct a 2-minute funeral and buried the cigarette butt. For the next 2 weeks, these experiences occurred frequently to nearly everyone. The drill sergeant was good at what he did. Excuse me. And in 2 weeks, he was our daddy, and we obeyed every command precisely or paid a price. Things became very different as we transitioned into the next 6 weeks of boot camp. We were treated much better and actually gained a lot of respect for our drill sergeant by the end of the 8 weeks of basic training. I became really good friends with a guy from Whitefish, Montana that came at the same time as me. His name was Tim Burke. We roomed together and helped each other through a lot of stuff. And here's a picture of Tim Burke and me in front of our lockers in Army basic training, Fort Ord, California. There you go. Graduation from basic training required that we pass CPR and be somewhat accurate with an M16 rifle, among other things. And then here's a picture of Dad. I passed the CPR exam, both the written and the application, on another person. When it came to accuracy with the M16, I scored an expert marksman. All those days shooting ground squirrels out in the field paid off, I guess. From basic training, I received orders for Fort Belvoir, Virginia. This was where I was to receive my advanced training, or my MOS skill, military operational skill, 52D, which was remote electrical power generation. I enjoyed the Fort Belvoir base because it was so close to Washington, D.C. Nearly every weekend I spent time seeing the places in D.C. that I'd always heard about. I loved going through the Smithsonian Institute. I would take days off to see it all, so I went through more of it at different times. I was there for about 12 weeks and then received orders to report to San Francisco overseas placement. I was in San Francisco for about 10 days. Each day we would assemble on the tarmac while an officer stood on a tall podium to read off your overseas orders. The places could be Vietnam, Korea, Taiwan, or Japan. Each day I reported to the formation and waited while the orders for the day were read off. On the 5th day, my name was called out for Korea. Once I arrived in Busan, I received further orders for my final duty station, which was the DMZ Panmunjom Korea Camp Edwards, which was a most interesting country, and I anxiously wanted to learn the language. I made many friends with the people and tried to learn as much as I could of their language and customs. In the 13 months that I was there, I saw a lot of country between the DMZ and so, because on the second week there was the first sergeant called on the second week there, the first sergeant called me out of morning formation and told me that the company commander wanted me to be his driver. And here's Dad, my company commander's Jeep. That's a cool job. From Korea, I was reassigned to Fort Carson, Colorado, where I was appointed as the assistant motor sergeant in the 4th Engineer Battalion. I loved living in Colorado Springs, where Fort Carson was located. I was there and it was there that I became good friends with a guy from Louisiana who loved Ford Mustangs as much as I did. Together we built 2 of them, a 65 and a 66 for street racing. We drove up and down Main Street in Colorado Springs, racing other muscle cars from stoplight to stoplight. Those were great memories. I also loved my military work, and while was there, I was promoted to sergeant. While in Colorado, my time in the military was completed. I wasn't sure what I was going to do at this point until I received orders to the NATO site in Italy. Here's his letter with those orders to go to Italy. I had the option of turning it down or re-enlisting for another 3 years. I really wanted to see Italy, so I re-enlisted. This turned out to be one of the best decisions up to this point in my life. So many good things were set in motion during my 3 years there, things that would stay with me for the rest of my life. It was during these 3 years that I finally discovered who I really am and where I want to go in my life. I also became forever attached to the people and the Rogai family, Servino, Gianmarco, and their parents. Servino passed away in 2011 from pancreatic cancer, but Gianmarco is still doing well and writes me nearly every week. It was a wonderful reunion of 45 years when Lindsay and Alex's Father's Day gift took me back to Italy. Our time there was incredible. I managed the incoming power of one of the NATO missile sites for 3 years in Uderzo, Italy. As a side note, this was where I met and became close friends with the Rogai family. Their son, Sir Severino, was serving his required 1-year service in the Italian military. Each NATO site shared their base with an Italian company, segment of a battalion. Severino often spent the weekend with me and many times took me to his home in Firenze. He was also a ski instructor and taught me how to ski. We spent many days skiing in Piacavallo in the Dolomite Alps. Pronunciations were sloppy there. I was also good friends with Servino's brother, Gianmarco, who later joined the church after I was home and attending Montana State in Havre. Radio checks at the NATO site were made every hour on the hour for security purposes. It became a very boring job, to say the least. It included synchronizing 3 20-kilowatt Daimler-Benz diesel generator sets. Synchronizing meant that approximately every 2 weeks we took one unit offline and brought another on, then performed any required preventative maintenance on the unit that was now offline. And here's my power generator generation room. After 2 months on the site, my assistant, Private Green, showed up. We became close friends. He was a Dallas football fan, and I was a passionate Denver Broncos fan in the days of the Orange Crush, as Denver called their defense. That year, Dallas beat Denver in the Super Bowl. Because duty was so light, I asked Private Green if he wanted to work every other day, alternating electrical power support for the site. He, in turn, would cover for me every other day. It worked out great and soon became every 2 days. By the time my duty there was coming to an end, we were often on every other week. I was able to see a lot of Italy and became fairly fluent in conversation with the language. I was often skiing with Cervino in Piaccavallo and staying with him in Firenze, my favorite Italian city to this day. However, when my time came to leave, I was offered an extension from the Army to stay another 2 years. I turned it down. A lot had changed in my life in those 3 years. Among other things, I had several very personal experiences with the Book of Mormon. I had been given a perfect knowledge of its truthfulness and its translation. It had been 10 years since I attended church, and that came to an end. I went every Sunday to an English branch in Aviano. I will never look back. I can't deny what I was shown. For the first time in my life, I also wanted to graduate from college. Upon my return, I enrolled in college using the GI Bill, which at that time paid for a good part of it. I was then 27 years old, the oldest in most of my classes. I loved learning and excelled at it. I often tutored other students in the design of automatic transmission, a very difficult class. The highlight of all this came years later when Alex and Lindsay paid for a 10-day trip to Italy for Father's Day. To this day, I can't express my gratitude. We attended the Rome Temple, saw Rome and Pompeii, and headed to Firenze, my favorite city, to meet up with Gianmarco. It had been 40 years since we were together. We went to a little pizzeria the week before I was to leave 40 years ago. At that time, I left him in Cervino a copy of the Book of Mormon and found him very interested in our health code, which I thought was interesting. Today, he is a past district president and currently serving as a patriarch. To meet again was beyond emotional for me. Thank you forever, Lindsay and Alex. And here's Gianmarco, Rogai, and me. That's it.